So this presentation today is not so much about SDL Trados Studio and how you use it as a product. That's not what it's intended to be. Rather, it's intended to be a little bit of an explanation about the platform that you've purchased and the other sorts of things that you can use it for. So I wanted to start off just by giving you a little introduction to the SDL Trados language platform itself, otherwise known as the App Store, that you've probably seen. Does anybody here never used the App Store? Everybody has used the App Store. You've never used it? Oh, you have? Okay. Well, that's good. Sometimes we have these events and we talk to people and they've never even heard of the App Store, which is always a surprise to me. So the App Store has something like, well, over 300 apps on the App Store now, and these are designed to extend the functionality of Studio. Sometimes to do that's better. Sometimes to do things that that Studio ought to be able to do and it doesn't, and sometimes to provide additional functionality altogether. And there's something like 350,000 downloads of apps from the App Store to date. Over 75% of them are completely free. There's a few paid apps, but most of them are completely free. And we have something like 40,000 unique users have been downloading apps and using them from the App Store worldwide. So it's been a good tool. It's taken a few years to embed itself and people to understand the capabilities, but it's there now. So the App Store itself, it's a developer hub, really. So developers can create custom apps and integrations using the APIs. Around 70% of the apps on the store are made by third-party developers. So other people, sometimes they're freelance translators who happen to know how to program and they've developed something to solve a problem or a solution that they were looking for. Sometimes they're by professional developers. All of the apps, before they go on the store, they go through a security check and functional testing by us. So we check every single app that goes on the store before it gets published. So if you are ever given an app by somebody and you start Studio up and you get a warning message, the reason you get the warning message is because it hasn't been signed. And if it hasn't been signed, probably it's because we haven't checked it. So then you would install it at your own risk. Because there are developers out there who create lots of plugins, but they never give them to us to sign. I don't know why, but they make them available for free in other locations, which is perfectly fine, but you just get that warning message. The advantage of apps, or one of the advantages of apps, is that it means that new releases, new features, they get updated much more regularly than they would in Studio. So within Studio, you have to wait until we release a cumulative update or a new release, which can take 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, depending on the release. With an app, if you need a fix to the app or if there's a new feature required, it can be done the next day or sometimes the same day. So it's really quick. And the good thing is it's not all SDL's ideas, sometimes the third-party creations. And we don't need to jam-pack the software, so we don't need to fill Studio up with lots and lots of features. They can just be features that are relevant to a user when they want to download them. Now, under the hood, so Studio isn't just a product, it's a platform, as I've said. And it's a platform that allows any developer to plug into that platform. I'm just going to very quickly, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm just going to explain that very briefly. So under the platform, we have things called APIs, which is an application programming interface. And this is a bit like somebody being able to plug in and take advantage of a feature that's been created by somebody else without actually doing it themselves. Is a simple explanation. So we have APIs for creating projects. So somebody could create an app or an integration that could create a project in Studio without actually using Studio for it, because it could use the API. We could create verifications, like a verification plugin. So there's one on the App Store called the Number Verifier. It uses the Number Verification API, and you can access it through Studio. So there's lots of different layers within Studio that a developer can connect to make it possible for them to create a plugin that can appear in Studio. Within our own team, I'm not going to spend too much time on all of this, the technical stuff, so I'll try to be quick on this. We have a team of developers who work for me in Cluj, who are there to help support developers. So does anybody here develop? Are there any developers in the room? No? Okay, well, if there were, we have a team of developers who can support you with any questions and things that you have. We can do that through the community. We also do it on a one-to-one basis sometimes. And they also create applications themselves. So there's just a selection there, but we have 89 apps on the SDL community that have been developed by the SDL community team themselves. And this is really cool because we pick up ideas sometimes from the SDL community, from people emailing and saying they have a particular problem, or it would be nice if we could have a new feature in Studio, something like that. And then we can develop them fairly quickly. A good example of that quite recently was in December, the European Union released the APIs for IATI, their term base. And then we spent a little bit of time building a new terminology provider for Studio that can connect directly to IATI. So if you work with any of the European languages, you can now receive auto-suggest and automatic term recognition directly in Studio, as if you were connected to a multi-term term base, but you're not. You're connected to the IATI term provider. So things like that, we can turn them around quite quickly. So I'm just going to look at a few sort of examples of the useful things that you can do with these apps. There's some things that are quite relevant to some of the topics we've been discussing today already. So if we think about machine translation, which is obviously a big topic. So machine translation, I'm just showing a screenshot there inside my studio, and I've got 25 machine translation providers plugged into Studio there. Now, these aren't the only empty providers. A lot of companies create their own machine translation providers, and they never appear on the App Store. They just build them for their own use, for using within their own company. But this gives us a bit of a dilemma, because with so many translation providers to choose from, which one do you use? It's a very difficult decision, and companies will go through a lot of time and effort to be able to identify which is the best machine translation. So any company using multiple machine translation providers, quite often they have a linguistic engineer or a lead linguist who will take all the different engines, pre-translate them in a project, look at the results, decide which is the best one, and then use that one for the project before they send it out. And all of that is a lot of effort. And the same thing could even happen to a freelance translator. So I've got 7 MT providers there. 5 or 6 of those are accessible to a freelance translator. It's exactly the same dilemma. Which machine translation engine are you going to actually use? Because the quality of one might be very good for one type of material and not so good for another type of material. So to resolve this, we built a little tool. This is one of the tools I'm afraid I can't demo live because I tested it before and the internet connection is not playing ball with me and I can't use it with 5 translation engines. But the idea is that you would create a project before you start, add your machine translation providers, but don't actually use them yet. And you click on this little selection, Compare MT, which appears at the bottom. This is a batch task, and what that does is it opens up another window that looks like this. And in this window, it gives you the ability, first of all, it lists all of the engines that you added to your project, even though you haven't used them yet. And you can select whichever one you want or all of them. And here I've got Google MT, DeepL, I can't see that without my glasses, my memory provider, BGlobal, which is a neural machine translation provider that comes from SDL, and the baseline language cloud. You then take all the files that you've got in there and you can select all or some of those files and then decide how much of the segments you think should be included for a quick test. And it can run through and select a random number of segments from your entire project based on whatever you say. So if you have 1,000 files in your project, obviously to pre-translate the whole project would take a long time. But if you just specify a few segments, it's not going to take very long. And the outcome from that is you'll get a report in Excel immediately comes up, and it lists the segment that was used, the source text, and then each one of the engines with their equivalent Russian translation for you. And you can then make a decision from the spreadsheet which one is going to provide you with the best translation for that text that you're using. So if we took that one as an example, I don't know if you can read that well enough on the screen, but in column B you've got the source text. Which one of those is the best Russian translation? Can you see it well enough? I'm assuming we have Russian speakers in the room.
I think it's the third one. It's the most natural and most easy to edit.
The third one, so that's the one in the middle over here.
Yes, and the next one is the same, I think.
Or similar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
So,
the similar, the same, totally the same.
okay. So we just take a look at that. Interestingly enough, that was DeepL. That was very interesting. So, and the one on the right is similar. That was Google MT. So if we look at it from left, we have the baseline engine, which is the Studio Statistical MT, which is not going to be very good. So we kind of expected that to be pretty poor. The next one is B Global with a generic B Global engine. So it's not trained for any particular material, but that's also Neural MT. And then the other ones we know, DeepL, Google, and My Memory. So that was interesting. Without looking at, you picked DeepL. So that's a tick in the box for DeepL by the looks of it. Even in Russian, which is interesting to know. People normally talk about DeepL being very good for European languages, so it's interesting to see that actually it's also good for Russian. Yes, correct. So all the report has done is it's taken a selection from the project based on the criteria that I set in the plugin, and then it pre-translates just those sentences against each of the engines I asked for.
On the previous slide, you said 9, if I'm right, 9 segments, yeah? Include segments.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't pay any attention to that.
Okay.
Because this is just me playing around with the deck.
So only translate 10 segments mean only translate 10 sentences.
10 segments, correct. Correct.
Thank you.
But I've also got only translate segments that are 25 characters or over because I'm not interested in short segments. So you can make a few adjustments to include whatever you want.
Thank you.
Yeah. And this slide is not necessarily representative of the settings that you saw there. Yeah. It could be, but okay, so that was quite interesting. If we're on that same topic of machine translation, there's another very interesting dilemma that comes up. So how many times have you worked for a customer, you've used machine translation, and they've wanted the SDL XLIF file back? And so then you've thought, okay, I don't want to give them the SDL XLIF file back because it's got AT in the middle. I don't actually want them to know that I've been using machine translation. This is also a topic that comes up quite often. Sometimes you'll work with a customer or a client who's quite happy for you using MT and then it doesn't matter. Other times you might work for a client who perhaps doesn't know that you would use MT. He didn't have an objection to it, but you don't particularly want to tell him. And so this gives you an opportunity, this plugin I'm about to show you, to remove the AT status in the middle of the columns. So there's a little plugin on the App Store. It's called the SDL XLIF Anonymizer. And what it does is it puts a little button, you can see it on the top, with a little anonymous mask on the top right. And when you click on it, it brings up this little dialog box that allows you to determine which segments you want to apply it to and what you want to change the match value in the middle. So on the previous screen here, you have this AT status, all this down the middle here, with the ATs on it. And as soon as you run the little plugin, what that does is it completely replaces it, in this case, with interactive draft. So all those segments are now set to be draft, and they're no longer set to be AT. So it completely clears it from the SDL XLIF. It's a free plugin. It's on the App Store. Very useful. So that's MT. I'd also encourage you, if you have any questions as we're going along, please feel free to interrupt me. Because what I'd kind of like, yes, it's free. It's totally free.
How to add this plugin into the system?
So okay. So I'll show you that now. So I'm just going to go to the App Store. So you go to appstore.sel.com. Which way? Hang on. I'm just. Yeah. Okay. Aha. So now I can't see it. Okay. Okay. Not to me though. Okay. So this is the problem I was having with the internet connection. It's a little slow here. Okay. So in here you can type in search for apps. In fact, if I just put anonymizer, that might find it. I've spelt it wrong. Hang on. It should what?
I think it can be interpreted free apps. It was 1 week ago, at least.
Oh, it was one. I would say top-rated apps. You mean?
Yes,
okay.
yes. I mean, it might be easier to find it.
Okay, let's give it a chance and see if it finds it from that. If it doesn't, I'll use your advice. Sumit, I always have mixed feeling about this whole working online on cloud environment. Because whenever you have to do it in places where you'd like to work, it's always really slow. Oh, you think it's quicker from there?
Yeah, you have a small link in home.
To just open the browser
from
straight
the
away.
welcome screen.
Yes,
You
you're
can
right.
get a bit faster.
Let me just, I'll have to move the screen again if I do that. Hang on a minute. I don't think it would be any faster in this case because it's still got to go through the internet connection.
Yeah.
But it would save me opening a browser first, you're right. Okay, so what you would do is you would search for the application on the App Store. And when you found it, you download it. And the file it downloads will be an SDL plugin file. And it looks a little bit like okay, so it looks a little bit like oh, let me go back one. So it will look a little bit like that, the file. What you download, when you finally find it on the App Store, you'll download a file and it will look like that. In this case, it's called SDL Exif Anonymizer SDL plugin. And to install it, all you do, if I just close Studio. So Studio has to be closed when you do this. I'm going to, is it really not possible for me to share the same screen? Okay. Right. So you can't have Studio running when you do this. So if I close Studio. If I close Studio and you double click the plugin, when you install Studio in the first place, it includes a plugin installer wizard. So you just double click the SDL plugin and this brings up this little wizard here, which is a plugin installer. You click on Next, agree with the terms and conditions, click on Next, select the version of Studio you want to install it in. So if you have multiple versions of Studio installed, you pick the one you want to install it with. If they're grayed out like this, so 2015 and 2017 are grayed out, that's because this particular plugin is only for Studio 2019. So it won't work on the older versions. So you need to make sure you have the right version for the version of Studio you're using, the right version of the plugin. So then click on Next. I'm getting a message saying it's already installed because I've already installed it, but you won't if you've never installed this before. Yep.
Are there any sense to have different versions of SDL Studio?
If you're testing them all the time, if you test them, which I do, then yes. Mm-hmm. But if you're not testing them, you don't need to have them. The only time it's really important, I'd say, is if you're about to upgrade and you're halfway through your projects. I would recommend that you finish the projects one by one in the existing version. Don't try and upgrade mid-project. It's always a mistake, I think. Finish those projects and just start all the new ones in the new version. That would be the sensible thing to do, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. But sometimes you might, sorry, there is another reason for it. If you have a customer who uses a server solution, for example, and they're using an old server solution, you might find that the latest version of Studio won't connect to it if it's really old. And so then you might have to use an older version of Studio to connect to their server. Yeah, so that's possible. It's quite rare these days because it's really old in order to have that problem, but it could happen. And then you just click on OK, and that's it. The plugin is now installed. And then when you start Studio up again, it'll load the plugins, including the one you just installed. So in this case, this is the warning message I mentioned at the very beginning about unsigned plugins. This is what it looks like. So I've got a bunch of plugins in here I'm testing at the moment, which have not been signed because we haven't signed them. And you get these warning messages. So I can just click through them. It doesn't break Studio just because they're there, but you get the warning message. And some of those are quite big, so this just might take a little bit for Studio to load. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But that's how you would install it. Okay. So I'll come back and show you that when it's finished loading. So I have a slide called It's a Little Thing. So what I wanted to talk about was just small apps that sometimes can make life really useful. So we developed an app the other day called TU2TM. So quite often we had people saying, why isn't it possible if I receive a translation in an email or something with just one sentence in it, how do I get that into my TM? Because at the moment you have to create a file, create a project in Studio, translate the file, and then add it to your TM by translating the file. And all you really want to do is just translate it in the email and then be able to keep the translation in your TM. So we built a little plugin called TUTM. And what this does is when you run it, it brings up a little window like this, which allows you to copy the source into the bottom left, put your target in the bottom right, select the TM you want to update it to, and click on Update TM, and that's it. It doesn't do anything cleverer than that, but it allows you to add a single TU to a TM without creating a Studio project or without translating a file, just by adding a TU to a translation memory. Does that make sense? Because there is no way to add a translation unit to a TM any other way. So that plugin allows you to do it. It's something that people have asked a lot over a while. It took us about half a day to build the plugin, so we did it. And another thing that came up quite often is document structure information. Does anybody not know what the document structure information column is in Studio? So if I go to Studio, I'll just flick it over and show you. When I open up an existing project from somewhere, if I'll take that one for example. And if I open a file up, oh, yeah, this is difficult, isn't it? Okay, this one has to go on the other screen. So if you open up Studio, on the right-hand side, you have this column down here on the right. This is called the document structure information column. And if you want to know what's in there, you have to click on it. And so that one is just telling you that that particular segment is a heading. So it's a heading in a document. If you go to another one, this one here, it's telling you that particular segment is a paragraph of text. Now, some files, when you work with them, this document structure can contain very important information. So if you're working with DITA files, for example, quite often the information that's in the DITA file, there'll be 5 or 6 items in there, and they're relevant to a translator when they're translating because it provides additional context. If you're taking a file that might have been exported from Pasilo, like an SDL file exported from Pasilo, the string IDs for the translation in Pasilo are put into the document structure column. So you can then translate that Pasilo file in Studio, but every time you want to see the string ID, you have to click on here, which is a real nuisance. So what we did was we built a little plugin called the DSI Viewer, which is here. And this plugin, you can put it wherever you like. I can put it there, for example. Move it over a little bit. And what this does is it should. Well, that's not very clever, what it should have done. Let me just open it again. Oh, there we go. It should give me the context in each segment as I go through it. It's not very relevant here because this file are all the same. You can see a heading, then a paragraph. So it just simply displays the document structure information as you're working. So if you're handling something like a Pasilo file that contains string IDs, you can see them as you're working through the file automatically. And that can be very helpful because the string IDs can tell you things like this is a button, this is a menu item, this is an insert menu, things like that. So it's a handy little addition to the Studio Armory that, again, must have taken no more than about an hour to build, in fact. And it's a good example of the little things that happen or that can happen through using the App Store that really ought to have been in the product in the first place, because it just makes common sense to be able to see the document structure while you're working. So it's a nice little tool. There's a better example there because I've used different files in there that show you the string IDs in the top one. On the bottom one, it's showing you string ID again, the fact there's a length restriction on the file, other bits of information, and you see them in real time as you're working. We then have more staple apps, so things that probably you would find you would use every single day if you're using things on the App Store. So things like the Community Advanced Display Filter. Does anybody use that particular plugin? Yeah. It's a brilliant plugin. So in Studio, you have something called the Advanced Display Filter, which is on the left-hand side there. And what we did in the App Store team is we took the code for the Advanced Display Filter and we added more things to it. And there were lots of things that came up that people keep asking for, saying, can it do this? Can it do the other? And if you have to wait for the development team, one, they might not put it in because they might decide it's not serious enough. And two, it's going to take you until the next major release to get it in. So we built it through the App Store with a Community Advanced Display Filter, and we can put them in from one day to the next and just update the plugin. And so here on this one, you can see we've got, if you look at the distances across the top, we've got a nice little button called Reverse Filter. So one of the difficult things when you're using regular expressions, for example, to filter on certain text in a file, it can be reasonably easy to find things that you want, but very difficult to find things that you don't want. So we created a reverse filter button, so you can search for the things that you want and then click reverse filter and get the things you don't want, which just seemed like a nice little add-on to have. We added something called Generate XLIF, which allows you to export an SDL XLIF file based on whatever you filtered on in the file. And you can send it off for somebody else to translate. So it's quite nice. There is no feature like that in Studio to do that. We can filter on colors. There's all different kinds of things we can do. So the different colored text. There's a few examples on the side there. So at the top there, you can see we're filtering on colors. On the next one, you can filter on specific segment numbers or groups of segments. You can filter on the document structure information. Or you can filter on comments. But there's a lot of other things in there. So if you filter of things a lot, it's well worth downloading and using the Advanced Display Filter from the App Store because it contains a lot more features than the out-of-the-box application. Another one that's really nice, I love this particular application. This is called the Regex Auto Suggest Provider. The reason it's so good, and I'll show you an example of this in a second, is that it allows you to create patterns to look for specific text and then automatically convert it to something else. And this is really important because Studio is really bad at handling units. It's really bad at handling units. I've been saying this for some years now, and I'm really pleased to say that the next release will have some big improvements in this area because they've completely redone it, and we'll be able to handle things properly, and also customize the placeables, which is really good because we've never been able to do that before. So that's coming, which is good. But in the meantime, you can use a tool like this to create your own patterns to convert things for you. So I'll give you a quick demo of how that works because it's really quite clever. If I go, oh, you can see it, which is good. I can't. Hang on. Just let me try and switch screens again. So you can still see my screen. So if I close that file and I open up a little project, this one down here, which I created before. This project is an English to Russian translation. And what I've done is I've created certain text, the lock segments of the English translation, because I can't read Russian. So that's just to remind me what I need to type. But the interesting thing here is if you look at this, I've got a TM connected here. And you can see Studio has recognized the number. So I can automatically insert the number across using Studio. And it's recognized this number. But it doesn't recognize the date or this bit of information that gets added at the end. I think this is what you do in Ukrainian. If it's wrong, that's my bad, because I just try to figure out how to write dates correctly in Ukrainian. But it doesn't recognize them, and that means you can't automatically convert the date. If you just press Control Insert, all you're going to get, or Control Comma, all you'll get is the number using Studio. Using the regex order suggest provider, you can build a pattern to do this for you. So the order suggest regex provider, once you've installed that plugin, it appears at the top here, and you can connect. You can click on regex order suggest match provider, and it appears down here. Now this has two parts to it. It's worth spending some time to get to learn this. Does anybody here not know how to use regular expressions, even at a basic level? A couple of people. Okay. I would recommend that you learn a little bit about regular expressions, purely because they can be incredibly powerful and can save you a lot of time, particularly when you're dealing with things like number-only segments and things like that, because you can filter on them, you can copy source to target for whole chunks of work in one go, and you can do things like this. So what it allows you to do is to create a regular expression, and I've got 3 different ones here. This is just the name of them, and I've given them a description. The regular expression is actually here. Now this plugin does a little bit more than normal regular expressions. So this little hash date underscore suffix hash, what this is actually doing is referring to a variable that I created over here. And this variable contains a lot more information, such as how do you translate all the days? And how do you translate all the months? Thank you. Yes. Yeah, that would be better. Thank you very much. Yeah, so how do I translate the days, which would be the top one? Or how do I translate the months, which is the bottom one, so you see the source and the target. And then also months middle, because I noticed that when I was playing around with the dates, in Ukrainian, the dates don't change the same depending on the context of where the date is. I got very confused. And so I had to create 2 separate things because the date seemed to be written a different way when the month was in the middle of a sentence, sometimes. That was what I found when I was trying to translate the Ukrainian anyway. So what that means is, when I start typing, if I come here and I start typing, as soon as I type, oops, sorry, the translation should be August. So I start typing August, and you can see immediately it's picked up the translation of the date. So I've got August the 24th, 1991, which took me 1 click to do because it recognized it using this little regular expression. Users of MemoQ will recognize this because MemoQ has a very nice feature built in for doing something similar with patterns and things like that, which is quite nice. But in here now we have it with Studio on the same. So I can do the same thing from here with February. I can get the same, and I can even do more complicated ones. So if we do it into this one, for example. So here we've got, it should be Monday the 22nd of November. I can type M for Monday and I get the entire thing translated automatically because it's recognized the context of the source, used the regular expressions and twisted it for you. It's a really, really powerful plugin. But you do need to learn a little bit about regular expressions. So I would definitely recommend you do it. It's not that difficult to learn a few simple basics. And once you've understood the basics, you can take it and extend it to learn even more. And if anybody would like to know a little bit about how to use regular expressions, feel free. I'm here until Saturday, so I'll be happy to give anybody who wants to know a little introduction at some point, and I can just walk you through the basics, things that are important to know, and show you how they work. And then from there, I'm sure you'll be able to extend it and do a lot with it. It's very powerful. So it's a very nice feature. I'd recommend that plugin to anybody. Then we look at plugins for the specialists. So these are a little bit more than just little apps, little simple things. So for the specialists, we have plugins that are almost applications in their own right. So completely new applications. So for the moment, if we think about subtitling, so we've created an application to try and help support the growth in the audiovisual translation industry. So at the moment, we look at those reports from Messer and from Slater, the estimate of the growth of the audiovisual translation industry over the next 2 years is going to exceed 2.3 billion, which is a huge market. And I went to a talk the day before yesterday on audio description, which is translating subtitles and films for blind people, where they create the text for a blind person to listen to. And the interesting thing for me for that is that when you translate all of that text to another language, it's the same format as a subtitle file. And so an editor will be able to take that information that has been just created as an audio description file, use the video for the context, and translate it all properly using a decent environment, if there was one. Now, the normal process for subtitling is, first of all, you have to create the time codes and add the source scripts. This is called spotting. Then it will go into a translation workflow, and you do translation, editing, and proofreading. Then there'll be a bit of simulation where you carry out some translation quality assurance. And then finally, you'd adapt that and deal with any errors. So you'd readjust the text. You might change the time codes if you were a specialist and you understand how to do this. And typically, a CAT tool only deals with the translation, editing, and proofing. That's all you'd get. All CAT tools pretty much can do that when the subtitle source is copied to Word, and you can use tools like Tortoise Tagger and things like that to be able to tag up all of the different tags and things that would be in a Word file when they copied a subtitle file to it and just translate the text. Some tools, MemoQ, Studio, Star Transit, they can handle SRT files. So you could open an SRT file and you can handle that. But none of them can really properly take consideration of the time codes. Now, some tools like MemoQ or Star Transit has had support for SR2 and maybe one other file format, I think, for years at a very rudimentary level. MemoQ just recently launched the capability to preview subtitles and do a little bit of basic QA and stuff like that on the subtitles while you're working. But they're very rudimentary features. Studio subtitling, we've taken it to another level. And there will be a release of the new version of this in the next 2 weeks probably, which is an amazing tool. And with this, you can not only carry out the translation, editing, and proofing, you can also do a proper TQA, translation quality assurance, on the file. And you can also deal with the errors and the readjustment of the text, because you can change the time codes. You can deal with things in milliseconds or frames, whichever way you want to work. We've got proper video controls with keyboard shortcuts. It's a very, very nice solution. And we're slowly trying to add the sort of features you'd find in tools like Subtitle Edit or AGSub. We've been adding many of those tools and features into Studio, because one of the complaints we heard from translators is that AGSub and Subtitle Edit are brilliant because they let them handle the subtitles correctly, but they're not a CAT tool, so you can't use your translation memories, you can't use your turn bases, you can't do the QA. There's lots of things you can't do. So they have to go backwards and forwards between the two. And they also didn't support all the different file types in a CAT tool, only SRT, so you couldn't take advantage of all the other formats. So what we also did, in addition to that, we added in support for some new file types. So we can also support WebVTT, STL Spruce, SBV, which is the YouTube format, and we support ASS and SSA, which are both from Advanced Substation Alpha. I think the more common these days is ASS format. And we've developed a TQA methodology with a bit of a help from a Professor Jan Pedersen in Stockholm University, who specializes in this area. And he built a methodology for carrying out translation quality assessment of subtitling. And I had many discussions with him about a year and a half ago, and he didn't feel it was possible to do this in a CAT tool because you weren't able to manage the time codes properly. You weren't able to preview the video properly, and all of these things are needed to be able to properly handle subtitles. Now we can, and we've added all that. And actually, even Professor Pedersen was quite impressed, because now we have this TQA method in Studio that can do all of the things which he needs to support that, which is good. So to give you a little look at what it looks like. So you have a few options. So you can add any video format you like. If you can play it on your computer, it can be used in Studio to preview the video. It gives you a bit of information about the aspect ratio. And we read the frame rate, because this is very important to understand the frame rate of the video when you're working in frames rather than milliseconds. because we can also convert the timecode format so you can see it in frames. And this is really important because when you're translating videos, sometimes you'll get instructions in a style guide, like from Netflix, for example, who'll tell you that each subtitle has to have 3 frames between each subtitle, for example, things like that. So we're supporting the ability to do that. And we'll be adding features to automatically add all these gaps between subtitles and things like that to make it easier to go. You can change the font and the background color and the character edges of the subtitle itself, which is really good to make it easier to see. And we carry out some rudimentary QA testing. So you can check the characters per second. You can check the words per minute, the characters per line, the lines per segment. So you can check all of those things and set those to be whatever your style guide has specified to make sure that it's correct while you're working. What we included in the file type support, there's a couple of examples of 2 file types, SRT on the top and WebVTT on the right. So we include support for the timecodes. So we can read the timecodes, we understand what they do, and we allow you to edit the timecodes in an environment in Studio so you can change them if they're incorrect. We've included support for formatting. So if a file type supports formatting, then we'll do it. So SRT, quite often in SRT files, you'll find them full of tags. And it's not because they should be there, it's because the only file type that any cat tool could ever open was SRT. So everybody converts their files to SRT. It's not always correct because SRT itself can only support bold, italic, underlining, and font color. Nothing else. So if there's anything else in there, it shouldn't be there because SRT doesn't support it. And it's probably because someone's done a conversion. So we've added support for lots of different file types that can support more, including file type positions. So like WebVTT, for example, allows you an engineer to position where the subtitles are shown on the screen. So they could be on the top left or the top right or at the bottom at the top. And we support that. So when you preview the video, the subtitles will actually be shown in the position which it reads from the WebVTT file. So we support all of that as well. Positioning. It looks a bit like that. So you have the studio environment as normal, but then you have 2 additional windows. So this one over here is where you'll see the video preview. This can be moved out of here. So I've just docked it into position there, but you can lift that window out and you can put it on another screen, or you can put it on this screen, make it a bit bigger. You can move it wherever you like. You can see it displays any formatting that might be in the file. So if the file contained formatting tags, in this case it's showing colors, it will show you all of that. And as you do the translation, it changes in the preview in real time as you're working, which is really smart. The table at the bottom, you can completely customize this table, so you can move the columns around. You can remove columns if you're not interested in them, but this shows you in real time any of the QA things that you're actually concerned about. So if you happen to be exceeding something, it's in red, like these ones here. These are already breaking the settings that I had in the verification settings. So you get a visual indication while you're working, which is really good. So we've added as much in there as we possibly can. What we've just finished working on is keyboard shortcuts. So we've been working with the Audiovisual Translation Society of the American Translations Association. Some people there have been working with us and telling us what needed to be in here before they'd actually use it. So we've been trying to make sure we added everything in there, because once we convince them to use Studio instead of Subtitle Edit, then we know we're doing the right thing. And the thing that was missing now was keyboard shortcuts. I had a very nice anecdote from the chairman of that society, who said that keyboard shortcuts is the difference between making a living and making a good living, because it's really important when you're translating to be very quick and not have to keep using the mouse. So keyboard shortcuts we've got in there now that control the way you move the video. So you can press a combination and you can move the video on 1 frame, or you can fast forward it, or you can move it back a frame or back a millisecond. You can play the previous second, all just with keyboard shortcuts, so that you get the proper context of the video as you're working. So it's really nice. It's a good example of a full-blown application that is actually just a plugin and installs into Studio, and you can use it in Studio. And then we even do things like, if you think about a little light relief, we have developers who think it's fun sometimes. And we even have a developer who created a plugin for Studio that gives you daily deal with it. So if any of you know daily deal with it, it's a little cartoon with a different cartoon every day. And he actually created a plugin that puts the cartoon into Studio on a daily basis. So if you wanted a little bit of light relief, you can install the plugin. It's free, and you could do that. But all of the plugins that I've shown you today here now are all completely free. Once you bought Studio, you have them. You don't pay for these. There's no additional add-ons. They're all completely free. But there's a lot more than that. And I'm just going to open up for questions at that point. But what I wanted to show you, if I just go back to Studio a second, if I can. Okay. In Studio, we have a lot of other things. So, for example, invoicing. If any of you wonder sometimes how you do your invoicing and things like that, there's a very nice little plugin called Backslide. This one isn't a free plugin, but this plugin allows you to create invoices and quotes from Studio projects or from other projects. So if you happen to receive an analysis file from a customer who's using MemoQ, for example, and you were even working in MemoQ with that, you can create the invoice and a project to bill them from within this plugin. So we support that as well. We've also added electronic invoicing. So if you happen to work in Poland or in Italy, we support electronic invoicing for that in here. And we intend to add as much as anybody needs in here to make it a usable, functional application for doing your invoicing and quotes. It's very nice. So you've got your projects here. You've got your invoices, your quotes, some little charts that keep a track of how much you've translated, how much you've done for a particular customer, things, just useful information, how many unpaid invoices you've got, how many paid invoices you've got. So we've tried to take what used to be part of, I don't know if you've heard of Bax before, it was developed by a Belarus developer, Eugene Kuczynski. He now works with SDL and has sold his product to us. And we've tried to take his product Bax, which is quite complicated and had a lot of features for assigning work and for integrating with group share and things like that. And we've tried to extract from it all the things that would be really useful for a freelance translator and put it into the plugin. So you have a very simple tool just for a freelance translator without all the complexities. So if anybody has a look at this and feels that it's missing something, drop me an email and tell me and we'll put it in. So we can add it to make it as useful as possible. We still are running Bax as a product separately, but that's growing even further and is becoming more of a tool for LSPs and corporates and things like that, doing a lot more. But at a level for freelancers, this tool is brilliant. It's really good. And Eugene, if any of you did work with him in the past, would know that he's the fastest developer I've ever known. You'll say something to him in the morning and you'll say to him, I want to talk to you about it at lunchtime. And before you get to lunch, he's built it. So he's really good, really good. I'm glad he's part of the team, so it's great. So there's lots of things like that. So I'll take any questions if anybody has any questions at that point. Yes.
Sorry if you already told about this, but what are the programming languages that you can use to build plugins? And like, can other people build plugins for your platform? Yeah.
So anybody can build a plugin for the platform. Anybody. You don't even have to talk to us about it. You can do it. The only criteria is you have to know how to develop. And C# is C#.net. This would be the preferred language because the APIs and Studio are all C# and .net. That's your best bet. Pardon?
Any plans to expand to Python, the programming language in the future?
I do.
Because it's really good for analyzing language and natural language processing.
Yeah. So I know a few people who built some applications in Python and have then connected them to Studio, but they've had to use C# in order to do that. So their core code was written in Python, and then they've integrated it in some way to be able to use it. So you still need to use a little bit of how to do it. It would actually be a lot of work for us to be able to provide all the access that we do at the moment with all the different APIs to support Python as well. That would be really difficult. So the work in converting the Python and connecting to our APIs is something you would have to do. But if you know how to do it, you can do it. The sky's the limit, really. Yeah. Good question. You're not the first person who's asked that question, actually. It's easy, isn't it? That's why. Yeah. So. That is okay. Yeah. Sometimes I think if you start in one and then you move, all the concepts start to look the same. And once you get used to it, then probably you'd be able to make the step. But yeah, maybe I'll talk to the development team and see what we can do about that in some way. But yeah.
You've told that there are some signed and I'm here.
Sorry.
There are some signed and non-signed applications.
Yeah.
Does it mean that non-signed application can crash a studio and things get bad? Bad.
So if somebody gives us a plugin to publish on the App Store, we don't charge for this, by the way. We don't charge at all. So if a developer creates something and gives it to us and says, I'd like to put it on the App Store, then we'll sign it for them and we'll put it on the App Store and they write the description. We don't charge anything for that. And normally we do the work in about a day and we will check it. So before we put it on the App Store, we need to make sure if it's an MT plugin, they have to give us an API key. We make sure it works. We make sure it doesn't break something in Studio. And then we'll go back to the developer if it does, and we'll say we found this problem. They'll fix it. They give it back, and then we publish it. If you find an unsigned plugin somewhere, it might work perfectly fine. You'll get the warning message, but it might work perfectly fine. But you have no idea what it's actually doing or what it might break. And we've never looked at it. We've never seen it. So that's the difference between a signed plugin and an unsigned plugin. So there is a developer, there's a Korean developer, who I'm not quite sure what his real name is. I know him as Kelly Edward, because he posts in the SDL community under a different name once a week. and just does things that really get under my skin. So we've had a running battle for about 3 years. And he has a website called Deep Translation Blog or something like that. And he has over 100 plugins on his page. Not one of them is signed by us. And he won't give me them to sign. He did initially, but he didn't like the fact that I was checking them and putting them on the App Store. He thought it took too long. So he said, I'm not doing this anymore, and does his own. And against every plugin in his translation blog, he publishes it, and he normally writes, fuck you, SDL, excuse me, on the actual blog article. So we have this little battle, but not one of them is signed. And he has plugins for all kinds of things. If he needs to be able to insert a space after the letter A throughout his document, he'll write a plugin for it and publish it on his blog. If he needs to be able to add a new line between paragraphs, he'll write a plugin for it. So he writes plugins for everything. He's a translator who knows how to develop. When he first started, he only knew how to translate in Visual Basic, actually. When he first started some years ago, and we helped him a lot. And he's developed a lot and become quite a reasonable developer. But he just builds things that not necessarily really needed, probably for his own use and to irritate me sometimes, I think. Yeah. But yes, it's possible. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. And if anybody does have any other questions, or if you want to know something about the product in another way, something we didn't talk about today, just generally, I'm here till the end of the day, Saturday, or till Sunday morning, in fact. Please feel free to come and find me and ask any question. Even if I look busy, I'm happy to stop. And we can talk about anything you like. Cool, thank you.